what's the benefit? I mean, how do you justify that? So we were just talking about justifying anything. We extrapolated it to art because we both love art and we're both artists. So, although Gary's
Well,
a
when you
much
start
better
asking
fine artist than I am, but we have
when
our
you start
art.
asking when you start asking the question about in science, is this research worth doing?
Yeah,
Then you start asking the question, is anything
is
worth
anything
doing?
worth doing?
What's worth doing?
Yeah,
So, and in my case, I would my direct thing that I have direct experience with is drawing and painting. And I was going to life drawing classes, which I really enjoy. And so you fill up sketchbooks full of these renderings of models on a stage. And I started to think, what's the point of doing this? You know, why?
you
I,
you think too much.
I find it enjoyable,
Yes.
but it has no inherent value in and of itself. Nobody's really ever going to see any of this stuff that I've done. I could put it on social media, but let's pretend social media doesn't exist. Let's pretend it's 20 years ago. I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be going to these classes and I'd be drawing on a Sunday for my own enjoyment. So I wondered if other people felt the same way I did. So I actually found a book about people's experience going to life drawing classes. And I found there was a similar question. People, the author of this book said, why do we do it? And he spent probably a third of the book giving various ideas and theories as, what impulse does this satisfy? Why? So at the end of the day, what I realized is that, like anything in life, everything in life, if you enjoy it, you should be doing it, because that's the most you can ever hope for out of life. If you're not enjoying it, stop doing it. But if you dig it and you don't know why, and nobody else thinks anything of it and doesn't care about what you're doing, but you dig it, keep doing it. Because that's all there is. That's all there is, man.
You figured it out in your mid 50s. You figured out life.
Well, maybe, maybe.
See, I have a practical explanation for or justification for what you just said. Okay, so you said the philosophical part, which I completely agree with. I'm an epicure. If you put me on the list of like ancient philosophy, like I love Stoicism. I love reading about it, but I'm really more of an Epicurean when it comes to that, which is pretty much the Stoic philosophy, except I actively avoid unpleasant things. I don't believe that I need to have negative stimuli in my life in order to grow as a human being. I'm not saying that you can't. I'm just saying that I personally think that I can grow from positive stimuli as well. And so I seek out pleasurable activities. That's what I do. Now, I'm not a hedonist, okay? That's different. But what I'm saying is that, on a very philosophical level, I believe that doing things that are good for me helps me be a better person, because if I'm in a good mood, then when I go to the grocery store and then that checkout lady, she's like having trouble scanning that thing because that thing just won't scan, and I'm like, then I'm in a much better position to say, it's okay, man. This stuff happens. Don't worry about it. It's fine, and then not create ripples that would affect her day negatively and may cascade into something else. So you know what I'm saying? So if it's good for my disposition to sit and meditate in the morning, or to go to the park and feed squirrels, or or paint or write, or do this, or whatever it is that charges my batteries, it's not just good for me. It's good for whoever I come in contact with too. So it's not like this weird hippy dippy ripples in the universe kind of thing. On a very,
No, I mean,
not that I
certainly
not that I'm saying that doesn't exist. What I'm saying is, on a very practical level, the people that I'm going to come in contact with, I'm going to be more pleasant towards because I'm in a pleasant mood, right?
uh, I don't. Yeah, that's not hippy dippy at all. And I've experienced the exact same thing. That when you're in your groove, you're doing the thing that is what you're supposed to be doing. The thing uh, the thing that creates no waves for you, the thing that is frictionless, that when you're doing it, you're like, this is what I should be doing. You relate better to other people. When you are in doing something in life that is just grinding your gears, it's the wrong thing, it perturbs you, then you're nasty to other people.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So it destroys that harmony.
Let me tell you a little story about the other day, the donut story. So I walk into this shop and I know they've got the best donuts in the world, only on Friday mornings, thank God. So I walk in on Friday and I get one for, the sinker, which is like this giant like cinnamon roll, and this, oh God, this donut that's filled with icing and has this big smear of icing on top, and it's chocolate. Anyway, so I get it, and I'm taking it home to my beloved, and so as I'm checking out, this lady walks in a nurse's outfit, and she says something about, she's like, oh, look at those donuts. They're packing up for me. She said, oh, but those things, they will get you, they will end your life, or I don't know, something like that. I said, yeah, you know what? Skydiving didn't get me, so I don't see myself going out this way. I don't think this is going to do it. So the skydiving will probably do it. She just kind of looked at me, and I was in the middle of taking my walk, so I was at the end, so I was all like, I was in a good mood. And I said, by the way, I said, all those like minutes, years, months, whatever it is that you like preserve by eating right and not indulging in this stuff, they're all at the end of your life when you're miserable anyway. So, why not enjoy it now? And she's like, so she kind of looked at me, right? And because she's obviously in the healthcare industry, so this is counter thinking. And then, but the funny part is, I rang up the stuff. I tip. I get out of there. I'm leaving, and she says to the lady behind the counter, "What's this one filled with?" So I don't know if I made a sale for them or not, but live a little, live a little. One of those donuts isn't gonna kill you, Like 15 of them a day will kill you possibly, or lead to complications. But have the donut.
What? Oh, the old saying, in all things moderation.
Yeah, the other saying is moderation's for monks, but I think that was Robert Heinlein actually.
That's my answer to why do anything?
Why do anything? Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, why, so to get us back on track, why do SETI, right? So here's the other argument. We've only been doing this for 40 years. That's a drop in the bucket. We haven't had enough time to detect these civilizations, right? But that's not a real answer either, because according to Fermi's paradox, the way Fermi figured it out, they should be here, right? On this planet, contacting us. They shouldn't be out there. Like, if interstellar travel is easy and enough time has elapsed, they should be on the moon, right? They should be in orbit around us. They should be like...
Yeah, so it seems to me that Fermi's lunchtime discussion was predicated strictly on numbers.
Yes.
And from a numbers-only perspective, they should be here.
Yeah.
But we've touched on a lot of the big filters.
A lot of the practical filters, yeah.
Exist. And they're considerable.
And we haven't talked about all of them. I mean, there are many more, like gamma ray bursts, right? Which are pretty common.
It was very interesting to me.
They're scary.
I was not aware of that particular phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so for anybody who might be listening, the gamma ray burst is a thing that is not terribly uncommon out there in space. And if you have the misfortune of being, I forget how many light years we're talking about.
It's not that far. I mean, it's a pretty large range.
If you are within that range, it's a life extinguishing event.
Oh yeah, you're gone.
Within that radius.
Pleasant. It's like the Lex. Do you remember the Lex? That's a really obscure, but like it's like the giant dragonfly weapon. It bursts and like. All the planet, not the planet's not gone, but all the biosphere is gone, right?
Right. So
planet would remain.
Yet another reason why civilizations that may have arisen are just extinguished.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really found the number of filters really piling up, and these aren't these aren't extreme out there filters. These are really solid, credible ones.
Yeah, these are the natural ones, like the ones that are like the ones that we predispose are like, because we talk about technology, we talk about the nanites and that sort of thing. There's another one that I just became aware of. I mean, well, no, that's not true. I've been aware of, but the last lecture I went to, we're talking about these rocket companies like SpaceX, I think Rocket Lab too, and a couple others, and they've been launching these swarms of rockets, right? They call them rocket swarms. They'll launch 30 rockets at a time, and satellites, right? For communications, they want to do it for cell phones and things like that. So, there's all these private companies that are launching, and it basically, from what I understand, and I don't know, but from what I understand, when you want to launch a rocket in the United States, you just call like this number in Washington. You say, "Hey, we're going to launch a rocket. Is that okay?" And they basically go, "Yeah, go ahead."
It's where you have to have the FAA is involved.
Yeah.
There have to be all kinds of plans,
Yeah.
emergency plans, contingency plans,
Yeah.
this, that, and the other thing.
But they rarely say no, is what I'm saying. Like,
Oh yeah, I think they rarely say no. That's true.
So what's happening though is all these satellites are being launched, and all this debris in the near Earth orbit, and it's making optical astronomy really hard. So like when you take long exposure pictures, you get these tracks where you never used to get this. Decades ago, you never got this, but you're taking like a long exposure of a star, and you've got like the camera panning from the ground, right, in an observatory, and all of a sudden there's all these streaks on the exposure, and now you have to use a computer to get rid of those, and that's fine. But this is growing, and it's growing at an alarming rate, apparently, to optical astronomers anyway.
Well,
Go ahead.
I just had a lengthy conversation with a mutual friend of ours who is involved in a large, complex international astronomy effort.
I know who you're talking about.
And this topic came up because I was reading about the Starlink.
Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about.
And I follow certain people on Twitter, and every week it's like, well, another Falcon went up today, launching another 358 Starlink satellites. And I'm thinking, geez,
that's a lot.
How many are they going to launch? So I looked it up. It's not very hard. The planned constellation size for the entire Starlink constellation, as they call it, 420,000 Starlink satellites. 420,000. So as of about 10 years ago, there were only 6,000 satellites in orbit.
Right.
Total.
Yeah.
420,000 they're going to put into orbit.
Yeah.
So naturally, there are two concerns that you've enumerated. One, the impact on astronomy, and two, the impact on space junk, because this is all low Earth orbit stuff that's in the zone of where the International Space Station is, and where other satellites have to operate. So my problem with this is that, yes, it is possible to subtract out that interference for astronomy purposes. However,
at the moment,
yes, but it also eliminates certain types of observations that will no longer be possible because of the brightness of of those satellites. You could subtract out, but some of these sensing methods require stacking, where you're looking at the same part of the sky over successive nights, and you're putting them all together to get one complete image.
Yep.
Well, the satellite is repeatedly going over that spot, and it can outshine the thing that the faint object you're trying to see, rendering your ground-based instrument useless for that study. So the impact is real, but also the space junk problem is real as well. Now, the FAA requires a certain degree of reliability in terms of deorbit technology. Most satellites that are launched have to carry onboard rockets to deorbit. They can't be left there as garbage. But the reliability rate, what they consider reliable, is 90%. So most of the time that's okay, but when you start talking about numbers like 420,000...
Yeah, so let's do a quick back of the envelope thing here with Fermi would love us for this. So 46,000 or whatever it is. Over 40,000 satellites going to fail, right?
So my problem with this is that this is the classic commerce versus capitalism,
Yeah.
rather
Money, 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 money,
commerce
money.
versus natural resources.
Money, money, money.
And the only difference now is that the frontier has changed. I don't think that you and so government organizations protect things like control of the airways, what portions of the RF spectrum remain available to us because they belong to all of us, and so forth.
Right.
National parks, oceans, you name it. The space above the earth is exactly the same thing to me.
But there's no treaty about
I don't feel there's been any discussion
Mm-hmm.
about increasing the number of low Earth orbit satellites by 10,000%. I don't think that public discussion has ever taken place, and I just don't see how that could be allowed.
So it's my understanding that some optical astronomers have expressed some concerns and written some people who are in charge of corporations that have done this. One person in particular, and the reply was basically, "Oh, we'll build you an observatory on the dark side of the moon." So is that flippant? Like, you know what? We don't. Basically, you don't count. I have money, and you don't count.
The whole reason to build these constellations in orbit is ostensibly to provide communications, internet access to remote regions.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm all for that, but there has to
At
be
what cost?
There has to be a risk-benefit analysis.
Yeah. At what cost? Right.
And I'm not seeing enough public debate about this, and it bothers me.
So here's the other thing that happened too, which I was dimly aware of, but I didn't understand the full effect that it had. I guess in November of 2022, the Russians destroyed one of their own satellites.
Yes.
Just to see what would happen.
What would happen?
And so basically,
huge cloud of debris.
yeah. So basically, instead of one defunct object, there's now like tens of thousands of pieces of this defunct object. And so apparently, like, even the members of the International Space Station had to take cover for a second, or whatever. But like, it's it's just amazing.
It was extraordinary arrogance to do such a thing.
To say, we can do this, so we will do this. And it just speaks to me again of the possibility, even though again it's anthropic, but like the or it's not anthropic, it's human centric, that all it takes is a couple individuals to ruin the party, right? So you can make a treaty saying, like, we're not going to talk to those guys over there, but all it takes is one drunken alien to go, I'm going to drive over there anyway, And
again, if you're talking about numbers, that's part of the numbers argument.
Right.
If 99% of your species is controlled and ethical,
yeah,
that still leaves the radicalized 1% that have the power to be incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
Well, let me bring this back to one more. I think I only have one more slide that I thought was notable.
Oh, good.
And that was that his position that life is common, but intelligent life is not.
It's common but stupid.
So biologists tend to agree that other forms of life likely exist. The number of planets on which life might start is large, obviously. But they don't buy the deterministic argument that high intelligence evolved on Earth, so it must eventually evolve on other planets. They tend to see the implausibility rather than the inevitability of intelligence. So the galaxies could be teeming with organisms, alive, reproducing, none of which are tool makers or self-aware or conscious.
Well, what's the advantage of intelligence from an evolutionary standpoint?
The advantage?
Yeah.
The advantage is that it's more likely that you can survive adverse conditions in order to procreate.
So again, what if you have a world that's really nice and there's a lot of symbiosis, and you have lichens, and you have these interacting creatures that depend upon each other, and if I can imagine a world like that, right. I'm not saying but like why couldn't that exist? And so since there's little competition, if any, for resources, maybe everybody's got their own little biome and they have their little fun in that little biome, and there's no crossover, so there's no competition. Or
have you ever read the book Guns, Germs, and Steel?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so
Great
I already
book.
had to read this about 15, 20 years ago whenever it came out.
Oh, we should probably read that one again and do that one.
And yeah, I read, I enjoyed that book. He wrote two subsequent ones that weren't quite as good, but were still interesting. One of them was called Collapse.
I remember
Why,
it. I didn't
why,
read it, but I remember it.
why great civilizations fall apart, the Mayans and so forth.
Yeah.
But in Guns, Germs, and Steel would argue that, well, why did northern or
Yes.
specifically European
Yeah.
cultures become scientifically advanced
Right.
and other parts of the world didn't? And there are
They
many
would talk about
factors.
the Dryas, right?
What's that?
The Dryas, the younger Dryas.
The younger what?
Oh, the Dryas, Dryas. So there was a period called the Younger Dryas where there was um, um, ice and in northern Europe and in most of Europe, I think, and there was it was a cold spell, and so the humans that lived in that part had to harden up. They had to like invent things that they didn't
Right.
need
So
before.
getting back to your question about, well, what if the living is easy?
Yeah.
That incentive.
Yeah, you live in the tropics, You live in Hawaii. It's 72 degrees with a nice breeze most of the time. I was talking to a guy today who lived in Hawaii. He was stationed there in the military back in the day. He didn't have a heater. He didn't have a furnace. He didn't have an air conditioner. He had louvers, and he could open them up, get the trade winds to come in, or close them down. And that's it. That's all the
So
temperature
if you're
regulation he needed.
if you're a life form that is living on a planet where the living is easy, there's no biological or evolutionary imperative to develop further because
Stagnation.
things are good. Yeah,
Technological stagnation.
right.
Yeah. Maybe your culture flourishes, but there's no reason to develop technology because there are no problems to solve. Everything's great.
Exactly, and the whole reason that Western civilization really developed was we cultivated wheat, and once we cultivated wheat, it allowed us to settle down and live in one place and cease a nomadic existence. And once you've done that,
Yeah.
then you can you're no longer spending all of your waking hours searching out for food. Now you have time to think about other stuff.
And there's specialists who can like
Specialists,
make
and also, of course,
pottery because they need to store
Europeans were
stuff and they can
Europeans were
build
blessed
things.
with domesticated
And
animals.
suddenly you have
And other
pyramids.
parts of the country really didn't have useful domesticated animals, or they had useful animals, but they couldn't be domesticated and harnessed for work of any kind.
Yes, that was interesting. See, that I found very fascinating. It was like, okay, or they didn't have enough. Here's the one that was really interesting. They didn't have calories, right? So his example was Papua New Guinea, right? So in Papua New Guinea, the train is terrible. There aren't any there aren't any beasts of burden that you can use, and
Right.
the highest calorie food was this kind of root, taro root, I guess. And you couldn't cultivate land. It just was not arable land. Like the soil was terrible, the erosion was terrible. If you cut down the forest, it all goes ran away. So like you pretty much couldn't advance beyond a certain technological level readily because of those three factors. And I thought that never entered my head. I would have never come up with that theory. What an interesting theory.
Yeah, it all fit together very neatly in a package to kind of explain, why this culture here and not there. It's just random factors associated with the climate.
I think you could go further than that, and you could talk about culture as well. You could talk about philosophy and culture because the Greeks, right, had kind of this dual. We still suffer from it, I think, at times. It's a dualistic approach towards everything. There's good and bad. There's male and female. There's up and down. There's it's everything is one or the other, right? It's a bipolar kind of. It's not even a continuum. It's usually it's like an on and off kind of thinking, and that kind of thinking is simplistic, but it's not terribly useful in some ways, but it this us versus them kind of thing. Whereas you could argue that like there are cultures in the Far East that it's more of a holistic kind of thought where it's like, well, it's all part of a whole, and so that leads to like, well, since everything's part of the whole, why change anything? Like it's all the way it's supposed to
So
be, so like why change anything?
this puts me in mind of the arguments for saving languages that are about to go extinct.
Right.
Because when you learn other languages, even very common languages, Spanish, Italian, um, that for instance, how other Romance languages have gender assignments to common objects. Bridge is female in one color in Spanish, I think, but it's male in German. And the way that people write sentences about bridges, or how they describe bridges, is influenced by the gender that the object has in that language.
Wow, that's deep.
I recently heard something about this. That's a really simple example, but you know what I'm talking. You've heard much more interesting ones, I'm sure, about how the reason that the loss of obscure languages is so devastating is that different languages formalize different conceptions of reality. That it's hard to understand them through some other lens. But when you really dig into the language has developed around this worldview that other cultures have. That through the language you can parse that worldview, and some of these concepts are extremely alien to us, and yet if we had the time to understand them, they're extremely enlightening because it's an alternate way of apprehending what we all experience. But we get very enmeshed in, well, it's objective reality. We all experience the same way, right? But we don't. If that were true, all languages would be the same. But that's not what we find.
Yeah.
That kind of fascinates me.
And to go with the germs, guns, and steel thing, it's where the terrain, the climate, the locality of those places, and the fact that we didn't have instantaneous international travel or transcontinental travel, these pockets of culture and language and other ways of doing things existed, is in pre-technological times especially, but they even into like until maybe like the Roman era, where like there's some continuity because of a road system and things of that nature. But what you were saying about language is interesting, because there's a computer game I play called Fallout New Vegas I love, and I just recently started playing with the language settings, in particular because this one character said, loose lips sink ships. And I thought, I wonder what they say in French, right? So I loaded the game in French. Well, I can't remember. That's terrible because Italian. I loaded it in Italian. I can't remember the French right now. And it was because loose lips sink ships comes from World War One, right? That comes from like a very specific historical phrase. It was I remember posters with that on there, and they'd have a liner being sunk, by a U-boat kind of thing. So I said that can't be universal, and it's not. So in Spanish, it was something about lingua and spada. So it was like you can kill more with the tongue than the sword. That was how that idiom was translated.
Yeah.
And then in Spanish, it was a closed mouth gathers no flies. And then in German, it was silver is nice, but gold is better. Or no, silence is silver. Wait, it was speaking is silver, silence is golden is what it was. That's what it was. And then I forget what the French was, but it was fascinating that like somebody somewhere had to translate that. Somebody somewhere had to like say, wait a minute, that's an English idiom. Well, we need this character to say something. What are they going to say? So somebody had to make that determination. I always find it fascinating, especially with poetry. When people translate poetry and it rhymed in French or Italian, and it rhymes in English. How does that happen? That doesn't happen because it's not easy to rhyme in English. It's really easy to rhyme in Italian.
That gets to the whole thing about how problematic translation is.
Yeah.
I remember maybe a year or two ago, and I've never read it. It's not the kind of book I would ever read. A new translation of War and Peace came out, and people who were expert in such things were raving about, oh, this is the closest you're ever going to get to the original Russian.
Nice.
It's the same thing that we're talking about, that there is a feeling and a way of expressing ideas in one language that just cannot be directly translated. Sure, you can put the words in. You can substitute the word for dog in English for a dog in French, and other objects. But feeling and emotion, they are not nearly so easily translatable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the je ne sais quoi, the ineffable about language that gets back to that idea of how a culture conceptualizes reality.
Oh, and even within our own culture. I mean, well, we're a large country, so there's so many subcultures. But even with the advent of, the interwebs, just finding I can't even go on Reddit because I can't figure out the rules to all these subreddits, right? I mean, what am I allowed to post and not get kicked off? Or you know what I mean? I just don't, I don't get it. There are all these little cultures. So YouTube I get, right? I understand the community, but I've been here since 2016. So but Twitter, I am at a loss. Facebook, I still feel like a bumbling adolescent, socially on Facebook. I really don't know how to use that platform. And Instagram, I'm an infant. But I just don't, there's so many to choose from. And within those, even if I know how to use the platform, there are all these little subdivisions. On Facebook, I have, I think I created 3 different Facebook groups. And so, but I post different things to each one because it's a different audience, right? So the joke that I tell about Star Wars can go on the one, and the joke that I, or the wonderful piece of art that I took a picture of at the gallery, I post on a different one, right? So, it's dynamic, and it's and there's so, like you said, there's so much out there, so much information out there that why wouldn't an alien species just stay at home and explore their own cultures or invent new ones as we are,
Yeah, so at the end of the day,
or just look at cat videos,
to kind of to kind of wrap up the discussion on the book, there are so many filters for extraterrestrial contact, or even the development of extraterrestrial civilizations, that even given the sheer numbers of planets out there, it still seems very explainable to me that we don't see evidence around us and that we're not being contacted by. So it doesn't seem like that much of a paradox at all when you really get into all the reasons why we should expect not to be contacted and be aware of others.
I think we're alone out here.
That's one of the most interesting theories.
I think we are. That's my own personal thought.
He doesn't really spend much time on it.
No.
Yeah, the idea that it's just us.
It's just us.
There are no other civilizations.
I'm not saying that there never were or there never will be, but I'm just thinking the distances are vast. The timing is bad. The window of communicability between that and either transfiguration or destruction is relatively narrow when it comes to cosmic timelines.
I think that window is really small.
I think it's really small. Yeah, I think it's think about the last 10,000 years. That's really when human beings really came into their own, right? You're talking about domesticating wheat. When did that happen? 6,000 years ago? 8,000? I don't know. But it's
something on that order.
I think it's less than 10. So
But you're getting into the thing that people often use when talking about the immense timescales of the universe, which is the cosmic calendar.
Yeah, that's a really handy. That's very handy, actually.
I learned about that when I was 13 from, again, that famous show that we both watched.
Yeah, and I think that helps to conceptualize it because, like, when we talk about when this is I love this one. So when we talk about millions and billions, so like when people talk about money, they talk about the budget or they talk about spending, and they talk about GDP, millions. So a million seconds is like, I don't know, from now until sometime next week, right? It's something like that. But a billion, right? We just change a letter. So it doesn't sound like a big difference. A billion is like 32 years. Okay? That's a long freaking time compared to next week, right? So when people hear like, and we throw around that number now, billions, you know.
Yes, we do. And I don't want to ruin this conversation with politics, but frequently we talk a lot about national debts and deficits, and we talk about 14 trillion, 20 trillion dollars in debt that we have to pay off. None of the politicians who are throwing these numbers out have any conception of
it's like having a conception of the size of space.
It's exactly the same. No one can conceive of how much money that is. I mean, the only way to quantify it is to talk about, well, if I paid X number of dollars for the next X number of years, how many years would it be to pay that off?
Exactly.
That's the only way you can conceptualize.
It's the only way to do it. And so the cosmic calendar works in that way. So you say like human beings showed up, what, like 3 days before the end of the year or something like that?
Not even.
2.5 or 1.5, something like that. It's small. Like and it depends on what you mean.
Last day.
It depends on what you mean by human beings, right? So it's what do you define as human, right? So is it hominids or is it Homo sapiens sapiens or is it technological humans? And if you're talking about technological humans, Stephen Webb talks about maybe 300 years. Science, he talks about, right? So he's talking about like maybe 300 years. So we're talking minutes to midnight on the 31st of December, right?
Seconds.
Is it seconds?
I think so.
It may be. So it's like, it's really, we haven't been around long enough for anybody to detect us. And unless they're just hanging out in the solar system like these von Neumann probes. But like, is it, well, that's the other one that was interesting. Maybe the probes turn on them, right? So like you get a V'ger kind of event from like Star Trek 1, the worst Star Trek movie ever. And like, you just like, something happens, it gets irradiated, some other programming gets like, it bumps into something and then it turns around and goes, kill all humans, and it turns home and it like eradicates the host civilization. But, I don't know. There's a lot of really great ideas in this book. There's some iffy science in this book.
Yeah, so
there's some good science too, though.
So I'm reading the 75 solution version compared to the 50 solution.
Yeah, tell me some of the more exotic ones if you think of any.
I would have to actually look.
Oh, never mind then.
But what I was going to say was that I thought the book could have been cut in half. It would have delivered the same message.
Yeah.
There was a lot of time wasted. He went into extraordinary detail about DNA and things like that were just, I can take it as read that these things exist. I didn't know. It felt like he was padding the book out.
Yeah.
Why he would go into extraordinary detail about things like that, but not about the inner workings of the atom, which are just as critical for the scientific arguments that are being made for other chapters in the book. He didn't go into those, but he went way into biology.
And some of his solutions aren't really solutions. He's like, sometimes he's just talking about biology in general, and he's not telling me why it solves the problem. He just says, oh, well, this is how hard it is to make biology. Oh, great. Well, it's related to like the problem, right? So again, like for me, like the phosphorus thing was one. The other one, there was another ingredient to life that was like exceedingly rare. Oh, I know what it was. It was something that allowed amino acids. Some kind of like, it was a more complex chemical. It wasn't an element, and it was Oh, frick, I can't remember what it was now, but it was something that allowed catalysts, you know, to happen. It was a catalyst. It was something that allowed cells to divide, or either meiosis or mitosis or something like that. And again, I'm not a biologist, obviously, but it was another filter that was like, this ingredient is so rare that, right. So would you put in the chat?
Oh, not to take away from your discussion,
No, please.
uh, but so I'm not a science fiction consumer in books. I tend to read stuff about ordinary folks facing ordinary problems of family conflict and such. Um, but one of the few science fiction books I have read is called Calculating God, and it has everything to do about the things that we're talking about.
Oh, cool.
And the premise, and I think you would really be interested in it. The premise is that we are contacted by aliens, and they are they're all about mathematics, and it is the premise allows for this exploration of things like the fine tuning of these various physical constants. That was actually my first exposure to those discussions. So if you want to have a fun science fiction leap or exploration into the universe appearing to be tuned just for us, it's a good book for that.
Well, what would you even say to, like, okay, so you meet, so let's say we meet an advanced civilization that's on the number two level of the Kardashev scale.
Yeah, we'd have nothing in common.
What would we say? What would you say personally? Like, what would I say to someone like that?
There would probably be very little meaningful.
I'd probably say, I'm glad you're there. Please leave me alone.
Right. So I mean, that's kind of a joke that's made in the book, the one we just read, that you really would hope that you don't encounter another alien civilization, because the likelihood that we'll be at the same technological development stage is zero. Well, obviously not, because they've got here across the vast reaches of space, so they obviously have technology far beyond our own. And that being the case, it would be like encountering cavemen. Well, there would be nothing to talk about. There would only be we would be observed.
Yeah.
As a curiosity, but not a civilization with whom you would want to exchange.
Well, that's what Hawking said on numerous occasions. Said, just keep your head low. Like, don't like be transmitting stuff, and
right. He talks about this in the book, that isn't this irresponsible?
Yeah.
For people who are heading some of these SETI programs,
just
to be
do it.
A high-powered signal that says, "Here we are." That could be the worst thing imaginable.
Yeah. Fortunately, apparently, they sent it to a cluster that, like, there's pretty low risk of anything being there. It's like the something to do with the galactic cluster having, like, radiation, too much radiation. Like, it was the type of galaxy. It wasn't a spiral arm galaxy, but like a lot of, like, elliptical galaxies, which they think would not have Goldilocks zones. So the type of life that would exist there wouldn't be. But here's the other thing. We talk about evolution. We talked about, stresses. So, like, if there is a really rough and ready, like, civilization that lives with heavy radiation, like, we probably don't want to mess with those guys. You know what I mean? Like, they're pretty tough, I'll bet. And maybe that solves the spacefaring problem, right?
Maybe they're loving. Maybe they're loving and benevolent.
Yeah, maybe they know what love is. We could only hope.
So
it's a good place to start.
At the end of all of it, I don't think the Fermi paradox is all that paradoxical after all.
I love that. That's a wonderful way to conclude this.
Some practical explanations as to why we don't hear from anybody else.
Well, and don't want to.
Don't want to.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I think we do want to, because we're human, because
we don't want to be alone.
It's an unanswerable question, because it's a question that anybody who's ever looked into the sky at night, everyone's wondering. You think, is there some not person, some intelligence out there looking at the sky right now, thinking the same question.
Yeah.
Somebody live out there.
Yeah. It's a poetic notion. You know, it's a.
Well, not to mention, here's a problem. It could be cataclysmic for human culture because it would end our feeling of being special,
Yeah.
and it would upend religion. That's a whole other topic, right?
I guess, but yeah, that's another topic altogether. I've
Because then you would
I've actually heard some like people who have chosen to speak on behalf of their religion talk about this. It's interesting, but maybe we can find a source to read about that and then discuss that on another.
Okay, so they're probably out there, but the thing that occurs to me about that is that if you are a religious person, you would then have to account for reasons why the supreme being who has revealed all these other truths to you chose to keep that secret.
Oh, it's a mystery.
Or lie.
It's a mystery. Whenever something can't be explained, it's it's like that cartoon. There's a scientist at a board, and he's drawing equations, and step A, blah 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 blah. He has this very long question. A miracle happens. Well, maybe you want to elaborate about that. Maybe you want to elaborate about step B, where the miracle happened. But it's I don't know. Are we at the end of science?
I think so. I think I've gone through all of my points.
Okay.
That were worth talking about.
Yeah, we've done this a good service, I think, and thank you, Stephen Webb, for writing this book, and thanks everybody who stayed and listened, and got merch, and it's in the background here, and it's not scientific, it's philosophical. You have questions about that? Ask me. There's links. You can buy a hat. We passed 11,000 subscribers just not long ago. So this thing's starting to gain some traction. So pretty happy about that, and hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments, put them in the appropriate spot. I like to answer all the comments that I get if they're nice. Be nice. And I don't understand a lot of these emojis. So like you could probably insult me through emojis. I wouldn't even know. All right, so we'll let you know when we're ready for the next one. Gern Blanston, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Patrick.
Signing off for now. The wow signal.
Recording stopped.
That was fun, I think. I think we did a really good job with that one.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it helped that the book kind of like the table of contents served as a great outline, I thought. So, the one thing that he did do that I liked was he just went like boom, 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 even if I didn't like each one that he, proposed. But I thought it was pretty good. He's not a writer. Very few science people are,
He's not a writer, and there were just certain we went from 50 to 75, and like I said, there were just a lot of them that I thought you could have just left this one out.
Yeah, and there were a couple. It was like, nah, this is just a branch of the last one, and this is kind of a repeat.
I thought that many of them were retreads of previous ones that just had a slightly different flavor, but not enough to be their own standalone category.
Yeah, he started to feel like he was, like you said, he was padding the list, and there were other ones he didn't think of that I thought like I didn't say it, but the swarms, right? So one of the theories is that, technological civilizations just throw a bunch of junk up there, and it becomes too dangerous for them. They have this shell, and they can't leave their orbit because they have all this junk up there. So, they're stuck at home. They basically locked themselves in. They painted themselves into a corner.
It's really hard to think about these things and divorce yourself from your own bias as a human life form. Which is, we know that it's limited because you can't imagine what you can't imagine. So
Dunning-Kruger, right?
having set that as a boundary condition, I really do find a lot of these, the ladder of life problem, the